I contested my cousin's shady will and won back my MawMaw's house. Here's everything that happened. I've been lurking on this sub for about 4 months, ever since my life got turned upside down by Will, a cousin I thought I knew, and a lawyer who apparently can't count to 2. People here seem to know their stuff, and I figured I owed it to this community to share how everything played out, because when I was in the thick of it, reading other people's stories on here is what kept me from losing my mind. This is long. Really long. But the details matter, because in probate law, especially Louisiana probate law, the details are literally everything. I'll start at the beginning. The background. My name is Camille. I'm 26. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I work as a veterinary assistant at a small animal clinic on Perkins Road. I make $34,000 a year, which in Baton Rouge means I can afford a studio apartment off College Drive for $895 a month, a 2014 Chevy Cruze that overheats every summer like clockwork, and not much else. I love my job. I love animals. But nobody becomes a vet assistant to get rich. You do it because a 3-legged pit bull looked at you once with so much trust in its eyes that you decided you'd spend your life earning that trust from every animal you met. That's my story, anyway. My grandmother, everyone called her MawMaw, was Lucille Thibodeau. She lived in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, a little Cajun town about 90 minutes west of Baton Rouge. If you've never been, Breaux Bridge is the kind of place where people wave at you from their porches even if they don't know you, where every restaurant has a roux going by 9 in the morning, and where the crawfish boil isn't a party, it's a sacrament. MawMaw's house sat on Rees Street. A 4-bedroom Acadian-style cottage with a wraparound porch, pecan trees dropping nuts all over the yard every fall, and a kitchen that smelled like the Holy Trinity, onions, celery, bell pepper, 365 days a year. MawMaw made gumbo in that kitchen every single Sunday for 50 years. Not an exaggeration. 50 years. She had a cast-iron pot so seasoned it was practically sentient. The house sat on 1.2 acres and was worth about $310,000. She also had a fishing camp out on Henderson Levee, a 2-room cabin on stilts over the Atchafalaya Basin, the kind of place where you fall asleep to frogs and wake up to herons. That was worth about $85,000. MawMaw had 4 grandchildren. My brother Remy, who's 24. Our cousin Therese, 29. And our cousin Beau, 31. Beau is the oldest. Remember that. Here's the thing about MawMaw, she was fair. Relentlessly, stubbornly, almost annoyingly fair. If she made pralines, she counted them out so every grandchild got the same number. If she took one of us fishing, the other 3 got a phone call that week to hear every detail so nobody felt left out. And when it came to her estate, which she talked about openly, because MawMaw was not a woman who believed in secrets, she said the same thing every single time. When I'm gone, y'all split everything 4 ways. That's fair. That's family. She said it at Thanksgiving. She said it at Christmas. She said it at crawfish boils where the newspaper on the table was soaked through with butter and spice. She said it at Sunday gumbo dinners when all 4 of us were crowded around her table. She said it to our parents. She said it to her neighbors. She said it to Father Michael at St. Bernard Catholic Church, because MawMaw told Father Michael everything. That woman had no filter between her brain and her mouth. It was one of the best things about her. Every single person in MawMaw's life knew exactly what she wanted. MawMaw died on a Wednesday. She was 87. She died in her house, in her bed, in the room where she'd slept for 53 years. The funeral was Saturday at St. Bernard. The whole town came. I'm not being poetic, the whole town literally came. The pews were full. People stood in the back. Her friend Da made the gumbo for the reception, and bless Dot's heart, it wasn't as good as MawMaw's, but nobody said that out loud because was 78 and she'd been crying since Wednesday and she tried her best. I thought the hardest day was the funeral. I was wrong. Update 1. The will reading. The will was read the following Tuesday by an attorney in Lafayette, a man named Pierre Landry. I'd never heard of Pierre Landry. Neither had Remy. Neither had Therese. None of us knew where MawMaw had found this man. The will was dated 14 months before her death. It left everything to Beau. Everything. The house on Rees Street. The fishing camp on Henderson Levee. The $31,000 in savings at Iberia Bank. Every pecan tree, every floorboard, every pencil mark on the kitchen doorframe where MawMaw had measured our heights every Christmas since we were small enough to stand still for it. All of it. To Beau. The rest of us got nothing. I remember the exact moment the attorney read it. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing above us. I remember the smell of the office, old paper and cheap coffee. I remember Remy's hand going flat on the table, like he was bracing himself against something. I remember Therese making a sound that wasn't a word. And I remember Beau sitting there with his jaw set and his eyes forward, not looking at any of us. Not shocked. Not surprised. Just sitting there like a man who already knew what the letter said before it was opened. Because he did know. Beau is the one who helped MawMaw find Pierre Landry. Beau is the one who drove MawMaw to the appointment, alone. MawMaw hadn't driven since 2020 when her cataracts got so bad she couldn't see the road signs anymore. Beau is the one who was present when the will was signed. And Beau is the one who, 6 months before MawMaw died, quit his job as a welder at a shipyard in Morgan City, moved into MawMaw's house, and told everyone he was there to take care of her. Remy said it best, afterward, in the parking lot. He was leaning against his truck, staring at the sky, and he said, Beau was barely around for 28 years. He shows up for 6 months and suddenly gets everything? That's not MawMaw talking. That's Beau talking through MawMaw's mouth. I drove to MawMaw's house that afternoon. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I'd walk in and it would still feel like her house, still smell like roux and coffee, still have her slippers by the back door. But when I pulled up on Rees Street, Beau was already there. He'd changed the locks. He opened the front door, MawMaw's front door, with the wreath she put up every Easter and never took down, and he looked at me the way you'd look at a solicitor. This is my house now, he said. Y'all can come visit, but call first. I stood on that wraparound porch where I'd eaten watermelon every 4th of July since I could hold a slice, and I said, Beau, she told us. She told everyone. 4 ways equal. He didn't blink. He said, what she told people and what she put in writing are 2 different things. The will is the will. He closed the door. I sat in my Chevy Cruze in MawMaw's driveway and cried for 45 minutes. Then I drove back to Baton Rouge and started making phone calls. Update 2. The investigation. The first person I called was Miss Doris, MawMaw's neighbor. Doris is 79. She's lived next door to MawMaw for over 30 years. She brought MawMaw tomatoes from her garden. MawMaw brought Doris gumbo. That's how it worked on Rees Street. Doris told me something that made my stomach drop. She said, your MawMaw told me in September, this was about 4 months before she passed, she was worried about Beau. She said he was handling things and she wasn't sure what he was handling. She asked me if I thought Beau was a good boy. I said yes. Doris paused. Then she said, now I'm not sure I was right. I called Father Michael next. He's the priest at St. Bernard, and MawMaw confided in him about everything. Her health, her worries, her family, her recipes. He told me, Lucille told me many times she wanted everything split equally. She was a fair woman. She was clear about this. But I'm a priest, Camille, not a lawyer. Then Therese found something that changed everything. MawMaw had a previous will. It was from 2019, drafted by a different attorney, a man named Claude Broussard, who practiced right there in Breaux Bridge. Therese found the paperwork in a box of MawMaw's old documents that Beau hadn't gotten to yet. That 2019 will split everything 4 ways. Equally. Exactly like MawMaw had always said. The new will, the one Beau produced, was drafted by Pierre Landry in Lafayette, a completely different lawyer in a completely different town. Nobody in our family had ever heard of the man. So I looked him up. And what I found made my blood go cold. Pierre Landry had been disciplined by the Louisiana State Bar Association twice. Once for inadequate communication with clients. Once for failure to maintain proper records. This was the attorney that Beau, who had never once in his life shown interest in MawMaw's legal affairs, had conveniently found for our 86-year-old grandmother who couldn't drive herself anywhere. I went to see a probate lawyer in Baton Rouge. She told me the case could potentially be challenged on grounds of undue influence, the legal concept that someone in a position of trust manipulated a vulnerable person into changing their estate plan. But she also told me something that made my head spin. Louisiana probate is not like probate in other states. It's based on the Napoleonic Code, not common law. There are forced heirship rules that might apply depending on whether MawMaw's own children, our parents, were still alive. The legal landscape was complicated, specialized, and expensive. How expensive? $20,000 to $40,000 to fight it. I make $34,000 a year. I drive a car that overheats in June. I live in a studio apartment. I had about $4,000 to my name if I maxed out my credit card and ate ramen for 6 months. But MawMaw didn't raise me to quit. MawMaw raised me to make a roux. You stand at that stove and you stir, slowly, patiently, and you don't walk away, because if you walk away it burns and you have to start over. You stand there and you stir until it's right. So I stood. And I stirred. Update 3. Building the case. Remy, Therese, and I sat down at Remy's kitchen table in Bro Bridge on a Thursday night. We had a legal bill we couldn't afford and a family member who'd stolen our grandmother's final wishes. We needed a plan. Remy went first. He said, "I'll sell the base boat." That hit me harder than I expected. Remy's base boat was a 2018 Tracker Pro 170 he'd been restoring for 2 years. He'd sanded it by hand. He'd repainted it himself, Cajun red, he called the color, which was really just dark maroon. He took it out on the Atchafalaya every weekend. That boat was his therapy, his church, his happy place. He sold it for $8,500. Therese cashed out a small 401k from her hospital job in New Orleans. After the early withdrawal penalty, she got $6,200. She'd been saving that money since she was 23. 6 years of savings, gone with a signature and a 10% penalty. I put $4,000 on my credit card. The interest rate was 22%. I tried not to think about that. Together, we had just under $19,000. It wasn't enough for the high end of the estimate, but it was enough to start. And we found the right person to start with. Her name was Annette Mouton. She was a probate attorney in Lafayette, Cajun to the bone, somewhere in her early 60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a handshake that could crack a walnut. Her office smelled like chicory coffee and old law books. On the wall behind her desk was a framed needlepoint that read, "La justice est aveugle, mais elle a un bon avocat." Justice is blind, but she has a good lawyer. Annette looked at both wills. She looked over the top of her reading glasses, and she said, "I've seen this before. In St. Martin Parish, this happens more than you'd think. An elderly person, a family member who moves in, a new will that shows up out of nowhere with a lawyer nobody's ever heard of. Let me see everything you've got." We gave her everything. And Annette found 3 things that, in her words, made this case walk itself into the courthouse. First, the 2019 will drafted by Claude Broussard, the one splitting everything 4 ways, was never formally revoked. The new will drafted by Pierre Landry didn't include the standard revocation clause. In Louisiana, this is a significant procedural problem. A new will should explicitly revoke all prior wills. This one didn't. Second, Pierre Landry's notarization of the 2023 will was witnessed by only one person. Under Louisiana law, a notarial will requires 2 witnesses. Not one. This is not a gray area. This is not a technicality. This is black-letter law. The will was witnessed by one person. Third, and this is the one that made Therese actually gasp, the single witness was Beau's girlfriend, Chantal. She was 27. She worked at Pierre Landry's law office. She was the sole witness to a will that left everything to her boyfriend. Annette took off her glasses, set them on the desk, looked at all 3 of us, and said, "How fast do y'all want to move?" We said fast. Annette filed a petition to nullify the 2023 will and reinstate the 2019 will. The petition alleged improper execution, specifically the witness deficiency, and raised the issue of undue influence as an additional ground. She outlined the timeline: Beau's sudden move into MawMaw's house, his role in selecting and transporting MawMaw to a new attorney, his presence at the signing, and his girlfriend's role as the sole witness. Beau was served at MawMaw's house. The house he'd already started renovating. And I need to pause here, because this next part is the detail that still keeps me up at night. When I found out about the renovations, from Remy, who'd driven past the house, I asked what Beau had done. Remy said, he tore out the kitchen cabinets. MawMaw's kitchen cabinets. The ones she'd stood behind every Sunday for 50 years making gumbo. The ones with the little burn mark on the counter from when Remy put a hot pan down without a trivet in 2009. The ones where MawMaw kept her good china on the top shelf and her cast iron on the bottom shelf and her jars of roux in between. Those cabinets. Gone. I didn't speak for 2 days. Not because I was angry, I was past angry. I didn't speak because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I would say something I could never take back. And MawMaw didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. Update 4. The hearing. The hearing was held at the St. Martin Parish Courthouse in St. Martinville. If you've never seen it, the courthouse is a small white building with columns out front that looks like it belongs in a movie about the Old South. Spanish moss hanging from the oaks outside. A statue of Evangeline in the churchyard across the street. The kind of place where history sits on every surface like dust. I wore a navy blue dress I'd bought at a consignment shop in Baton Rouge. Remy wore khakis and a button-down. Therese wore a black blazer she'd borrowed from a coworker. We looked like what we were, 3 working-class kids from a Cajun family who'd pooled their last dollars to fight for something that was rightfully theirs. Pierre Landry didn't show up. Let me say that again. The attorney who drafted the contested will, the one with 2 disciplinary actions on his record, the one who'd notarized a document with only 1 witness when the law requires 2, the one whose own employee served as that single witness, did not appear. He sent a letter to the court stating he was no longer representing the matter. Annette leaned over to me and whispered, "When the lawyer runs, that tells the judge everything he needs to know." Bo had hired a new attorney, a young guy from New Iberia who couldn't have been more than 30. He had a nice suit and a briefcase that still looked new. He sat next to Bo at the respondent's table, and I swear to you, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. He kept shuffling his papers and adjusting his tie. He made his arguments, that the 2023 will represented MawMaw's true intentions, that Bo had provided genuine care, that the witness issue was a procedural technicality, but there was no conviction in it. He was reciting, not advocating. Annette was different. Annette was a surgeon with a briefcase. She presented the 2019 will. She presented the 2023 will. She laid them side by side and walked Judge Thibodeau, no relation to MawMaw, but I smiled at the name anyway, through every deficiency. The missing revocation clause. The single witness where 2 were required. The identity of that single witness as the primary beneficiary's romantic partner and the drafting attorney's employee. Then she called Miss Doris. Doris walked to the witness stand in a floral blouse and orthopedic shoes, clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. She told the judge what MawMaw had said to her in September, that she was worried about Bo, that she wasn't sure what he was handling. She spoke quietly, but clearly, and she didn't look at Bo once. Then Annette called Father Michael. He wore his clerical collar and spoke with the measured calm of a man who spent 40 years listening to people's troubles. He testified that Lucille Thibodeau had told him on multiple occasions, he estimated at least a dozen, that she intended to split her estate equally among her 4 grandchildren. He said, Lucille was a fair woman. That was the center of her character. I cannot speak to legal matters, but I can speak to who she was. Judge Thibodeau reviewed everything. The courtroom was quiet. I could hear the ceiling fan turning overhead. I could hear Remy breathing next to me. I could hear my own heartbeat. The judge ruled. The 2023 will was improperly executed under Louisiana law due to the witness deficiency. It was null. The 2019 will, the one splitting everything 4 ways equally, was reinstated as the valid testamentary document. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in 4 months. Then Bo stood up. He stood up from his chair, and his lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Bo shrugged it off. He turned and looked at us, at me, at Remy, at Therese, and he said, I took care of her. None of y'all were there. I fed her. I bathed her. I held her hand when she was scared at night. And this is what I get. The courtroom was silent. I could feel every eye in the room on us. Remy's jaw was tight. Therese was looking at her hands. And I wanted to say something cruel. I wanted to say something that would cut him the way he'd cut us. I had months of anger stored up, sharpened to a point, ready. But MawMaw didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. So I said, You're right, Bo. You were there. And if you hadn't changed the will, you'd be getting your quarter and our respect. Now you just get the quarter. Bo looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. Update 5. The aftermath. Bo didn't come to the next family crawfish boil. He didn't come to the one after that either. Last I heard through the family grapevine, he's back working at a shipyard. Not the same one in Morgan City, a different one downriver. He doesn't call. He doesn't text. He got his quarter of everything, just like MawMaw intended, and he took it without a word of thanks or apology. Chantal broke up with him. Apparently she didn't know the will had legal problems. At least that's what she told people. She told someone at the law office that she was not trying to catch a case. Pierre Landry's office reportedly let her go not long after. I don't know the details, and I don't care to find out. That chapter is closed. I went back to MawMaw's house for the first time since Bo changed the locks. This was about a week after the ruling. Bo had already moved out. He'd left the front door unlocked, whether out of carelessness or some last gesture, I don't know. I walked through the front door and stood in the living room. The wraparound porch was still there. The pecan trees were still there, dropping their nuts into the grass like they'd been doing for decades. The afternoon light came through the front windows at that angle that always made the dust motes look like tiny gold coins floating in the air. MawMaw used to say that was angels visiting. Then I walked into the kitchen. It was gutted. The cabinets were gone, ripped out, not carefully removed, ripped. You could see the marks on the walls where they'd been anchored. The stove was gone too, MawMaw's 1988 Kenmore that somehow still worked after 35 years. The countertops were gone. The backsplash was gone. The little shelf above the window where MawMaw kept her jar of bay leaves, gone. But on the kitchen doorframe, still there, untouched, in pencil, in MawMaw's handwriting, there was a list. A list of every grandchild's height, measured every Christmas. Camille, 4 feet 2 inches, Christmas 2003. Remy, 3 feet 8 inches, Christmas 2004. Therese, 4 feet 11 inches, Christmas 2002. Beau, 4 feet 9 inches, Christmas 2001. All 4 of us. Measured by the same hand. In the same pencil. On the same doorframe. Equal in her eyes from the very beginning. I stood in that empty kitchen and ran my finger over MawMaw's handwriting. The pencil was faded but the lines were still clear. She pressed hard when she wrote. She always pressed hard. She was not a delicate woman. I pulled out my phone and called Remy and Therese. Conference call. I said, "The kitchen's gutted. But the doorframe is still here. We need to put the cabinets back. And I'm going to learn to make the gumbo." Remy said, "I'll help with the cabinets." Therese said, "I'll find MawMaw's recipe. Dot might have it." We hung up, and I stood in that kitchen alone for a while. I put my hand flat on the wall where the cabinets used to be, and I thought about MawMaw stirring her roux, slowly, patiently, never walking away. You don't walk away from a roux. You don't walk away from family. You stand there and you stir until it's right. The resolution. The fishing camp on Henderson Levee sold for $82,000. Split 4 ways, that was $20,500 each. Beau got his share. Nobody fought him on it. MawMaw wanted it split 4 ways, so it was split 4 ways. Fair is fair. The house was kept. Remy moved in and is paying the other 3 of us a small amount each month as a buyout over 10 years. He's fixing the kitchen. New cabinets, not as nice as MawMaw's originals, but solid. He found a used stove at a second-hand appliance place in Lafayette that's almost the same model as MawMaw's old Kenmore. It's not the same, but it works. I used my $20,500 to pay off the credit card, the $4,000 plus the interest that had already started accumulating, and put a deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment with a kitchen big enough to actually cook in. It's not fancy. The counter is laminate and the stove has a burner that runs hot. But it's mine, and it has space for a cast-iron pot. Therese got MawMaw's recipe from Dot. It was handwritten on an index card in MawMaw's heavy pencil. The card was stained with what I'm pretty sure is decades-old roux. Therese photographed it and sent it to me and Remy. The first line reads, "Start with a prayer and a good stock." I made the gumbo last Sunday. My first batch. I stood at the stove in my new apartment and I stirred the roux the way MawMaw showed me when I was 11. Slow, constant, watching the color darken from blonde to peanut butter to chocolate. I added the Trinity. I added the andouille. I added the stock. I let it simmer for 3 hours because MawMaw said you can't rush a gumbo and you can't rush justice, and both of those things are true. Remy came over. He sat at my small kitchen table and I ladled the gumbo into bowls. MawMaw's bowls, the ones with the blue rim that Therese saved from the house before the kitchen got torn up. Remy tasted it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's close. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't MawMaw's. It probably never will be. There's something that goes into a gumbo that can't be written on an index card. 50 years of practice. The memory of your husband coming home from the sugarcane fields. The sound of 4 grandchildren arguing about who gets the drumstick. The love of a woman who pressed hard with her pencil and never walked away from her stove and wanted everything to be fair. But it's close. And for now, that's enough." TLDR, cousin moved in with our dying grandmother, took her to an unknown lawyer, and had the will changed to leave him everything. House worth $310,000, fishing camp and savings. The rest of us got nothing despite Grandma telling everyone for years she wanted it split equally. We pooled money, hired a probate attorney who found the new will only had 1 witness, Louisiana requires 2, and that witness was our cousin's girlfriend who worked at the lawyer's office. Judge nullified the new will and reinstated the old one, splitting everything 4 ways. Cousin got his equal share but lost our respect. I'm learning to make Grandma's gumbo now. It's close. Edit. To everyone asking about filing a complaint with the Louisiana State Bar Association against Pierre Landry, Annette is handling that. She said it's already in progress. I'll update if anything comes of it. Edit 2. Yes, we considered suing Beau for the damage to the kitchen. Annette advised against it. The legal costs would exceed the recovery, and frankly, we just want to rebuild it and move on. MawMaw wouldn't want us spending more money on lawyers. She'd want us spending it on andouille. Edit 3. Thank you for the awards and kind words. I showed this post to Remy and he said, tell them the gumbo was closer to a 7 out of 10. I maintain it was at least an 8. We'll keep practicing.